I learned the 3 most common traits of elite performers, and it was a crippling sense of insufficiency, a superiority complex, and maniacal focus.
Yep.
And I think that those 3 things map onto what you were just talking about there.
Have you read this book?
I've read the first half.
Just so you know, that part from your podcast is in the book. You're in the book. Did you know this or no?
No.
Your podcast is in the book. Those 3
really?
things you just talked about.
Okay.
It's in the book.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, hell yeah.
So those 3 things, right? I am scared that I'm not enough. I believe that I can do more.
Yep.
I have the impulse control to be able to keep me focused and keep me moving forward. What would you say to the people that say, what you're describing sounds an awful lot like a competitor?
Okay. Yeah.
What's the difference between a competitor and an enemy?
Yeah, it's not a competitor because to me, so in the last 20 some years, I have worked my tail off to figure out a way of writing a business plan that I can teach others how to write a business plan. So when you go buy books on business plans, it's all boring, technical. It's for a Fortune 500 company or somebody that wants to go raise capital, and it's so complex and dense. You will not think about a business planning book that you're going to walk away saying, here's how I can write a business plan that's simple, that I can look at it over and over and over again. Great, I'm good to go, right? There isn't something like that out there. This is supposed to be a business planning book that turned into an enemy's book. So when I'm talking to the CEO, the publisher of a portfolio, okay, Adrian, and we're going back and forth. We had 5-hour Zooms, 5 one-hour Zooms just on the title. And in many cases, we would sit there for 15 minutes, no one's talking.
Who wanted what?
Who won what?
Who wanted what?
So they wanted to figure out a title that was a straight up title. Like, say, well, how to think and grow rich, how to, just a very much of a business
Build
planning, be in the title.
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
something like that. And then eventually I'm selling Adrian. I'm saying, but that's not what it is. This is much deeper than that. It has to do with enemies. And eventually, on the 5th time of choosing the title, guess who finally says the title of the book has to be Choose Your Enemies Wisely? Adrian does, from Portfolio. And I said, that's the title.
You won. It was a battle of attrition.
It was a battle of attrition. We put a few hundred of them, right? But it's an interesting concept when you're saying competition.
Yep.
To me, the 12 building blocks that I talk about in this book, we have different categories because one side of the building block has to do with emotion. The other side of the building block has to do with logic. And you read this when you were going through the book. So on the emotion side, it's going to move us. So for example, what skill sets do I need to learn? Well, I need to learn how to do a podcast, how to ask questions, how to do research. You told a Churchill story at the beginning with the sword, the size. And hey, your enemies are not ahead of you, they're behind you. Okay, you have to go find that story. That's content, right? Okay, so that means you're constantly reading. Why is this guy so good at what he does with content? Okay, he's very detailed. Look at the lighting. Look how he does it. Look at his sets. He's intentional. He's not winging it. Everything you're doing, for the most part, 95% of it can be replicated by somebody else. But the 5% is your wit, is your interest, is the curiosity. Either the person has it or they don't have it, right? Okay. So yes, I can pick up those skills, but do I have your willpower? That's emotional. Yes, I can go study the competition. Let me see the top podcasters out there, what they're doing. What is the category for politics, for business, for sports, for comedy? Yes, but enemy's bigger. Study competition all you want. But enemy's a complete different criteria that you're talking about. You can have all the money in the world. Fantastic. That's finances. That's money. You can go raise money. There's plenty of companies that raise money. Quibi a few years ago raised $2.3 billion. From who? All the big money guys. Everybody gave Quibi money. What happened to them? Katzenberg, Meg Whitman, everybody behind it went out of business. In 1962 was a super savings center, which is the year where Target came out, Walmart came out, and Costco came out, all the same year, 1962, okay? In 1962, when these companies came out, Kmart goes and raises a ton of money. 5 years later, Kmart has 250 locations. Walmart has 9 locations 5 years later. Kmart. On a leaders bulletin within 5 years, guess who's winning? Kmart's dominating. All logical, all numbers, spreadsheet, et cetera, et cetera. You couldn't tell me the founder of Kmart, who he is. If I ask who's the founder of Kmart, you're not going to say Mr. Kmart, right? That doesn't make any sense. What happened to Kmart a few years ago? Kmart goes out of business. They're no longer around. You know how many employees Walmart has around the world? 2.5 million employees. Do you know Sam Walton, one of the best books you can ever read is Made in America. It's 200 pages. He walks you through how he built Walmart. Do you know what his poorest kid is worth today? Poorest kid is worth $50 billion today. He's got 4 of them. Can you imagine these guys at Thanksgiving? They're like, hey, Johnny, I noticed, man, you're only at 50 billion. Do I need to, go fund me, raise some money for you? No, it's going to be all right. You're going to make it through. What's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is one is logic. The other one is emotion. Emotion brings out a different side. If it can be controlled madness, controlled emotion, it's going to go into a different gear that a normal person's not going to have.
We'll get back to talking to Patrick in 1 minute, but first I need to tell you about Element. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium with no junk, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, or any other BS. It is a healthy alternative to sugary electrolyte drinks, and it's how I've started my morning every single day for over 3 years now. You don't need coffee first thing in the morning. Your adenosine system that caffeine acts on isn't even active for the first 90 minutes of the day, but your adrenal system is, and salt acts on your adrenal system. Best of all, they have a no BS, no questions asked refund policy where you can buy it and try it completely risk-free, and if you do not like it for any reason, they will give you your money back, and you don't even need to return the box. Right now, you can get a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box by going to the link in the description below or heading to drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. That's drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom.
Let's talk competition. You were saying competitors, right? Okay, no problem. In high school, you can see somebody who was the best basketball player, super competitive at that level. Say they're tall, they're 6'6", they can jump 40 inches. They have a quick first, step. They're very athletic. In every way, they're the best athlete in the county, even in the state for that position, no problem. They go to college, they can compete, but maybe they're coming off the bench, averaging 7.2 points a game, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. No problem. They may not make it to the NBA, but let's just say he makes it to the NBA. Plays a year, 2 years, then he goes to Puerto Rico, then he goes to Spain, then he plays in Turkey, then he plays in China. 10 years later, never comes back to the NBA. He's out. Now he's an assistant coach in Puerto Rico or somewhere else. Then there's a guy that comes to the NBA, he competes. He's talented, he shows into work, he's a very good worker, stable guy, doesn't do the drugs, doesn't do the alcohol. He hooks up with a lot of girls, but he doesn't get in the way. He doesn't respect, he respects his teammates' wives. He doesn't do anything. He plays for 15 years, makes $200 million. Good for him. Then you have the psycho competitor who counts the 55 kids ahead of him that were chosen as the best high school basketball player, and he's ranked number 56. And one by one, he targets every one of them until he takes them out. His name is Kobe Bryant. Then you have Michael Jordan in 1984, where the number 1 draft pick is Hakeem Olajuwon. Fair, good selection for the Rockets. Number 2 is Sam Bowie. I think Portland picks him up or Seattle picks him up. Number 3 is Michael Jordan. You pick me number 3? Yes. What happens with Michael? See, these guys, Michael was never the highest paid guy in the NBA. The only time Michael was the highest paid guy in the NBA was the last year, made $30 million. Scottie Pippen made more money in the NBA than Michael Jordan ever made. Michael Jordan today's worth $3 billion. Scottie Pippen is not. What's the difference? It's a very different mindset. Scottie's a competitor, but he's not at Michael's level. By the way, it's very easy to criticize a guy like you who wants to compete. And maybe internally you don't want to compete. You want to dominate. Maybe internally you want to show everybody, no, I'm going to be number 1. Let's just say within, because professionally you want to do this. Totally cool. But there's a lot of other competitors out there that have good podcasts, and they're doing a good job. It's just a different mindset when you have that enemy. By the way, very rarely will those guys ever truly, again, reveal their top driver and the top enemy.
Why?
Because it's an element of insecurity.
Yeah, it's a signal of low status.
It is. And it's also, I don't want to give the other person credit.
Power. Yeah.
I don't want to give that other person more power than the person thinks they have. You don't have power. Oh, because somebody may be like, oh, I'm your enemy. I control you.
Exactly. Well, when it's a part of the come up story, it's romantic, right? It's grassroots. It's what's keeping you going. Look at how I was mistreated by my first high school coach. They didn't see the talent. I'm going to prove it to them. That's a beautiful origin story. Age 20. Age 45, that just sounds like someone who can't get the chip off his shoulder.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's interesting how the tools that got you here aren't the ones that will get you there, and how the strategy. This is again one of the reasons why continuing to rely on resentment and bitterness and the chip on your shoulder and enemies for too long becomes a very toxic fuel. And it's also, importantly, optics are very, very important. It's a signal of low status.
Okay, I don't disagree, but you brought up a story of Churchill, right? Okay. The world is weeks away from all speaking German. Okay, if we lose the war and the guy wins, no problem. Chamberlain cannot hold it together. And the story about how the only way Churchill said he was going to come back is for Chamberlain to come and beg him. The only way. Does it sound like something Churchill would do, by the way? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Churchill sat there and said, okay, he has to come and ask me, because Chamberlain sent other people. He said, no. Only one person has to come look at me face to face and say, you can do a job I can't do. Come back and help us. Think about that. Now, visualize that scene. We can see it in a movie or we can read in a book. And by the way, say 50% of it is true. The other 50% is true, right? The other 50% is a lie, and it's like build up mythical over generations, right? I believe that Churchill would want to hear it from a Chamberlain.
Have you heard of Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare?
No.
So this is a phenomenal book that everybody can go and read. Before the Second World War, it was considered ungentlemanly to use guerrilla-style tactics. And in fact, one of the British politicians said something to the effect of, if this is what it takes to win the war, I am prepared to lose. The Brits saw anything shy of gentlemanly conduct in war as a loss, even if it resulted in a win. And Churchill came in and changed that. He was the one that changed that culture. So he puts together this crack squad of eccentric weirdos. One guy invents the limpet mine, right, which you can descend to depth and then it'll attach using magnets and it'll blow things up. Another group developed what is the predecessor to the SAS. Another group are working on disguises and guerrilla tactics to disrupt infrastructure as the German advance is trying to move forward. So yeah, Churchill was prepared to play dirty. But, you know, you look at the tactics that were used, they only came about because of one man who legitimated it, and he said, we will do whatever it takes to win.
Now, here's the thing. When you hear a story like that, somebody may say, well, you know, what a cold-blooded bastard. Oh, my God. No wonder people hate him. No wonder he is who he is, where many presidents moved the bust of Churchill in the White House away and said, take this out, so I don't represent what he represents. Everybody acts all hard, right? We can hate a Churchill during peacetime, but during wartime, you beg for a Churchill to rise up. Wartime leaders like Churchill, you only appreciate during wartime.
There's a really interesting insight from evolutionary psychology here. There's two types of leadership. One is from dominance and the other is from prestige. Right? One is more authoritarian, it's tyrannical, it's very aggressive. The other is more altruistic. It's the rise to power is denoted, it's spread through the group. Everybody chooses together that this is someone who we all believe has the skills, and the dominance is not the same. And there are specific times when you want dominance and when you want prestige.
I agree.
And in times of conflict, you want dominance.
Sure. You could say it in business, it's startup versus when it's more established, right?
Precisely.
But here's also the thing, like the part where you got to give a lot of credit to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had a startup mentality, and then he took that to the company, and then he hires, his Scully that comes in from Pepsi, and he says, you want to sell sugar, water for the rest of your life, or you want to change the world? He brings him in. Then he ends up being the reason to fire Jobs. Jobs leaves, goes, builds Pixar, sells it to Disney. Most of his wealth is tied to Disney, not at Apple. Then he comes back and he realizes that style of leading is not going to work to take the company to the next level. When he comes back to Apple, the first phone call he says, the idea of thinking Microsoft is the enemy is behind us. We can't think like that anymore. This is what Steve Jobs says. And he goes to Microsoft and he gets $300 million from Microsoft to invest into Apple. And these guys hated each other. Microsoft came out in 76, Apple came out in 77, a year apart. And everybody was always comparing the two together. Bill Gates ended up being much richer than Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs was admired way more than Bill Gates. So what does this mean? The individual has to evolve. Like, you have to also recreate yourself as you're going through this. The same enemy that drives you when you're 22 years old should not be driving you at 32 years old, or else you haven't matured. You should also out-mature that enemy. And then 32, something else should be driving you, then 42, then 58, then 63, then 75. But you are going to have those love affair with those enemies. That's a love affair. You had an affair with this enemy over an 8-year span, over a 13-year span, over a 6-year span, over a 6-month span. But, there is truth in the idea of you still being driven by that enemy 18 years after you beat that enemy, 13 years after you beat that enemy.